So you've been captured. Congrats! You're about to become the most important person in the entire Aztec Empire for about 20 minutes. After that, your heart's gonna be in a stone bowl, your skull's going on a rack, and parts of your body might end up at a dinner party you were definitely not invited to. This is what it actually meant to be a human sacrifice in the Aztec world. And trust me, it was somehow worse and more complicated than anything you've imagined. The empire that ran on blood. The Aztec Empire, or more accurately, the Mexica Triple Alliance, had a theology problem. Their entire cosmology was built on debt. According to their creation myths, the gods literally destroyed themselves to make the world. Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca tore apart a massive sea monster called Cipactli to form the earth and sky, and the other gods threw themselves into a sacred fire so the sun would move across the heavens. That's the origin story. The universe exists because divine beings ripped themselves apart for you, and the Mexica took that personally. The sun, they believed, needed constant nourishment in the form of human blood and hearts. Stop feeding it, and it stops rising. Game over. Not in a vague, philosophical way. They meant it literally. Huitzilopochtli, the war god and patron deity of Tenochtitlan, fought a cosmic battle every single night against the forces of darkness. Without fresh hearts, he'd lose. Darkness would swallow the world. No pressure. This wasn't fringe theology either. It was state policy. The entire military apparatus, the economy, the political alliances, the architecture of their capital, all of it orbited around one central idea. Someone has to die today so the sun comes up tomorrow, and that someone was probably a prisoner of war. Probably you. How you got here. You were a warrior once. Maybe from Tlaxcala, maybe Huexotzinco, maybe one of the smaller city-states that the Aztecs hadn't fully conquered yet. Your capture didn't happen by accident. The Aztecs had a special kind of warfare designed specifically to take prisoners alive. They called it Sokia o Yodel, the Flower Wars. The name sounds pleasant. It wasn't. Flower Wars were pre-arranged battles between the Aztec Triple Alliance and neighboring states. Both sides agreed on the time and place. Elite warriors went first, fighting one-on-one in something closer to ritual combat than all-out war. The goal wasn't to kill your opponent. It was to subdue and capture them. A warrior who killed on the battlefield when he could have captured was seen as careless, almost wasteful. But the one who dragged back 5 living prisoners? That guy got promoted, received land grants, wore special cloaks, and was basically treated the way we treat pro athletes with endorsement deals. Your captor didn't just defeat you in combat, he became, in a deeply uncomfortable way, your father. Aztec culture considered the captor-captive relationship almost familial. He called you his beloved son. He was responsible for housing you, feeding you, and preparing you for what came next. He would not eat your flesh after the sacrifice because, according to Bernardino de Sahagun, a 16th century Franciscan friar, who documented these practices in extraordinary detail, it was not proper for him to eat his own son. Small comfort. The warriors who made this possible. Before we get to the city and the pyramid and your unfortunate date with an obsidian knife, you need to understand the men who brought you here, because the Aztec military wasn't just an army. It was a social institution that shaped every aspect of life in Tenochtitlan. Every Aztec boy was groomed for war from birth. At 15, commoners entered the Telpachcali, the House of Youth, one of which existed in every Calpulli, or neighborhood district. Life there was rough. Cold baths at dawn, minimal food. Hours spent memorizing war songs, learning to handle the atlatl spear thrower and the macuahuitl, and practicing formations. Noble boys attended the Calmacac, a more elite school attached to the temples, where they studied astronomy, calendrics, law, and warfare alongside future priests and administrators. The military ranking system was built entirely around captive taking. A warrior who had never captured an enemy in battle was called a tlamani and had basically no social standing. 1 capture earned you the right to wear certain face paint, 2 captures, and you got a feathered suit, 3, and you entered the Quachik, a fraternity of elite shaved-headed warriors who had sworn an oath never to retreat in battle. 4 or more captures could earn you entry into the Jaguar Warriors, or the Eagle Warriors, the most prestigious military orders in the empire, complete with distinctive animal-themed armor and access to the ruler's court. The pressure was immense. A young warrior who failed to capture anyone after 3 consecutive campaigns was publicly shamed. He couldn't cut his hair in the warrior style. He couldn't wear cotton. He was stuck in Maggi fiber clothing, the Aztec equivalent of showing up to a formal event in sweatpants. Some sources suggest these men were socially dead, unable to marry well or hold any position of respect. So when the warrior who captured you dragged you back to Tenochtitlan, he wasn't just completing a military objective, he was building a career, a reputation, and a future for his entire family. Your body was his resume. Welcome to the greatest city on earth. When you arrived in Tenochtitlan, you entered a city that would have made most European capitals look underdeveloped. Built on an island in Lake Texcoco, It had a population somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world in the early 1500s. London at the time had maybe 50,000. Paris had about 200,000 on a good day. Tenochtitlan had aqueducts, floating gardens called chinampas, a zoo, botanical gardens, and a market at Tlatelolco that served 60,000 customers daily. It also had a massive pyramid at its center with fresh blood running down the steps most mornings. The Spanish were genuinely stunned when they first saw the city. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who would later write the most detailed first-hand account of the conquest, compared it to the enchanted cities in the novel Amadís de Gaula. He said some soldiers wondered if the whole thing was a dream. It was that impressive. And then they smelled the temples. The Templo Mayor, that central pyramid, stood about 60 meters tall and had twin staircases leading to twin temples at the top. One was dedicated to Tlaloc, the rain god, the other to Huitzilopochtli, the war god who needed your heart. The whole structure was rebuilt and expanded at least 6 times, each reconstruction bigger and bloodier than the last. When the final version was dedicated in 1487 under Emperor Ahuitzotl, the Aztecs allegedly sacrificed somewhere between 4,000 and 80,000 people over 4 days. That range is enormous, because Spanish sources loved inflating numbers. But even the conservative end is staggering. Around the base of the pyramid stood the Tzompantli, the skull rack. Andrés de Tapia, a conquistador given the task of counting, estimated it held 136,000 skulls. Modern historian Bernard Ortiz de Montellano has revised that to around 60,000. Archaeologists working the site since 2015 have pulled out over 600 skulls from just one section of the rack's foundations, and they're still digging. The skulls weren't all adult male warriors either. Women and children turned up too, which threw a wrench into a lot of earlier theories about who exactly was ending up on the rack. The VIP treatment, also known as your last year on Earth. Not every sacrifice was a quick affair. If you were selected to impersonate a god, you got the full celebrity experience. The Aztecs had this concept called Ixiptla, a living embodiment of a deity. You weren't pretending to be the god. In their eyes, you literally became the god for a set period of time. The most famous example was the Tenochtitlan festival, dedicated to Tezcatlipoca, the god of the night sky and cosmic chaos. 1 year before the ceremony, priests selected the most physically perfect captive they could find. No scars, no blemishes, the right height, the right proportions. This person was dressed in turquoise and gold, given attendance, taught to play the flute, and paraded through the city. People bowed when he walked by. They kissed the ground under his feet. He met regularly with the Tlatoani, the Aztec ruler himself, who would personally adorn him with jewelry and fine garment. 20 days before the sacrifice, the Ixiptla was given 4 wives, each representing a goddess: Xochiquetzal, Xilonen, Atlatonin, and Huixtochihuatl. He lived with them in what was essentially a state-sponsored honeymoon suite. He ate the finest food in the empire. Musicians followed him everywhere he went. Then, on the appointed day, his wives left him. His attendants abandoned him near a small temple on the lakeshore, at a place called Acaquilpan. He walked up the pyramid steps alone, and on each step, he broke one of his flutes. At the top, the priest laid him across the sacrificial stone, opened his chest with an obsidian knife, and pulled out his heart, from God to dead in about 90 seconds. Quite the Monday. But the Tenochtitlan impersonator wasn't the only Ixiptla. Nearly every major ventena, the 20-day festival periods that structured the Aztec calendar, featured at least one deity impersonation sacrifice. During Ochpanitzli, a woman impersonated the Earth Mother goddess Tochi. She was decapitated, flayed, and a priest wore her skin while performing ritual dances. During Panquetzalistli, dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, a dough figure of the god made from amaranth seeds and human blood was crafted, paraded through the city, and eventually broken apart and eaten by the congregation. Even the gods made of bread weren't safe. The Ixiptla system revealed something unsettling about Aztec theology. The line between honoring someone and killing them didn't exist. Being chosen was simultaneously the greatest privilege and the worst thing that could happen to you. You got a year of luxury precisely because you were going to die at the end of it. The Aztecs saw no contradiction in this. The gods themselves had died to create the world. You were simply continuing the cycle. The menu of ways to die. Heart extraction was the greatest hit, but the Aztecs had a full catalog. Depending on which god was being honored and what time of year it was, you might die in several creatively horrifying ways. During the festival of Tlaquaxepihualizli, dedicated to Xiptotec, the flayed lord, victims were first killed by heart extraction. Then their skin was carefully removed and worn by priests for 20 days straight. The ritual symbolized agricultural renewal, the old skin peeling away to reveal new life underneath. Sahagun's accounts describe the skins eventually rotting and falling apart while still being worn. If you're eating right now, I apologize. But also, I don't. Arrow sacrifice was another method. Victims were tied to a wooden frame and shot with arrows and darts. The blood dripping from their wounds symbolized spring rain nourishing the soil. It It was essentially an agricultural blessing disguised as target practice. Then there was the gladiatorial sacrifice, called Ti La Hua Huanalisli. This one almost sounds fair until you hear the details. The captive was tied to a large circular stone called the Tenochtitlan, given a macua weedle, the Aztec sword club normally lined with razor-sharp obsidian blades, except his had the blades replaced with feathers. Then, 4 fully armed Aztec eagle and jaguar warriors took turns fighting him. If the captive somehow managed to defeat all 4, a 5th, left-handed warrior was sent in, and the historical record suggests at least one guy actually won. A Tlaxcalan warrior named Tlahuacol fought so well that the Aztecs offered him freedom and a command position in their army. He reportedly refused and chose to be sacrificed instead. Whether that's incredible devotion or incredible peer pressure, historians still argue. For the rain god Tlaloc, the preferred offerings were children. The priests specifically wanted them to cry during the procession to the temple, because their tears were seen as sympathetic magic for rain. The more they cried, the better the omen. If they didn't cry on their own, the priests made sure they did. Archaeologists found the remains of 42 children at the Templo Mayor in a single ritual deposit, all between ages 2 and 7, many showing signs of malnutrition before death. During the catastrophic drought and famine of 1454, the mass sacrifice of children apparently intensified, a desperate theological response to a very real agricultural crisis. Some victims were drowned. Others were thrown into fires and pulled out before dying, only to have their hearts removed. The Aztec ritual calendar had 18 months, each lasting 20 days, and nearly every one of them called for some form of human sacrifice to a different deity. 9 of those 18 months included ceremonies specifically dedicated to Tlaloc and other rain deities. The morning of. So your time has come. You're not an Ixipla who spent a year as a living god. You're a captured warrior, and your number's been called for the standard procedure. The night before, there was a vigil. You were ritually bathed, painted, and dressed in specific garments, depending on which deity you were being offered to. Blue paint if you were going to Tlaloc's shrine, chalk white stripes if it was Huitzilopochtli, red and white for Sheep Totec. The priests weren't casual about this. The costume mattered because, in their worldview, the details made the offering valid. Wrong outfit, and the god might reject it entirely. You were given sacred food and drink. Some accounts suggest certain victims received pulque, a fermented agave drink, or psychoactive substances derived from plants and mushrooms to dull the terror. Others suggest the victims were fully conscious and expected to face death with composure. The ideal, in Aztec ideology, was a willing sacrifice. A victim who climbed the steps with dignity was seen as especially blessed. Whether most victims actually managed that is another question entirely. A 2024 study published by Springer directly challenged the long-held idea that most victims went willingly. The researchers argued that the willing victim narrative was an idealized myth promoted by Aztec elites, and that actual compliance probably varied wildly depending on whether you were a warrior who understood the theological framework or a terrified commoner from a conquered province who had zero interest in feeding anyone's son. At the top of the pyramid, 4 priests grabbed your limbs and stretched you backward over the tekatl, the sacrificial stone. A 5th priest, the one holding the obsidian or flint knife, made a single incision below the ribcage. Modern analysis has identified at least 3 different extraction methods: entering below the chest cavity, cutting between 2 left ribs, or going through the sternal bone itself. The priest reached into the chest cavity, severed the arteries, and pulled the heart free. He lifted it toward the sun, then placed it in a stone vessel called a quahikali. Your body was pushed or rolled down the temple steps. At the bottom, elderly men called quaquakilton collected you. What happened to you after? Your skull was defleshed and mounted on the tzompantli. Thousands of skulls, all facing outward, all mounted on horizontal wooden poles between vertical posts. It was a religious monument, and a warning, and a flex all at once. When the Spanish arrived, they found the skull racks both genuinely horrifying and conveniently useful for propaganda. They used descriptions of them to justify their conquest, arguing the Aztecs were savages who needed the civilizing hand of Christianity. Your body was returned to the warrior who captured you. His family prepared a ritual stew called tilakatlayoli, made from dried maize. According to Sahagun, pieces of the sacrificed body were added to this stew and consumed by the captor's relatives and honored guests. But not the captor himself. He considered the captive his son and refused to eat his flesh. The act was ritual, not dietary. It was about absorbing the sacred energy of someone who had become, however briefly, an offering to the gods. Not everyone agrees on how widespread ritual cannibalism really was. Michael Harner's protein deficiency theory from the 1970s argued that the Aztecs practiced cannibalism primarily to supplement a diet lacking in animal protein. Most modern scholars have rejected this, pointing out that the Aztec diet included plenty of beans, amaranth, turkey, dog, fish, insects, spirulina algae from Lake Texcoco, and various game. The cannibalism was ceremonial and restricted almost entirely to the elite. Not a caloric strategy. Your limbs went to the captor's household. Your torso and heart went to the gods. Your skull went to the rack. It was efficient, organized, and deeply terrifying as a system. Where the dead go, if it's any consolation, and it probably isn't, the Aztecs believed that how you died mattered far more than how you lived when it came to the afterlife. Ordinary people who died of disease or old age went to Mictlan, the underworld, a gloomy, 9-layered realm ruled by the skeletal god Tenochtitlan. Getting through all 9 layers took 4 years of navigating rivers of blood, mountains that crashed together, and winds that cut flesh from bone. Not great. But sacrificial victims? They got the express lane. Warriors who died in battle or on the sacrificial stone went to Tenochtitlan, the House of the Sunday. For 4 years, they accompanied the sun on its journey across the sky, and after that, they were reborn as hummingbirds and butterflies. Women who died in childbirth went to a parallel paradise in the west. Children sacrificed to Tlaloc went to Tlalocan, a lush green paradise of eternal spring and abundance. So from the Aztec perspective, being sacrificed wasn't punishment. It was a promotion. You skipped the miserable underworld and went straight to the VIP afterlife. The priests emphasized this constantly, and it's one of the reasons some scholars originally believed victims went willingly. If your entire culture tells you that a sacrificial death is the best possible outcome, the peer pressure alone would be suffocating. Of course, whether the person being held down on the stone by 4 priests actually found comfort in the afterlife upgrade is something the historical record doesn't really address. The political machine behind the altar. Here's what nobody talks about enough. Human sacrifice was as much political technology as it was religion. The Aztec Empire ruled over dozens of tributary states, and those states were required to send tribute in the form of goods, labor, and people. Specifically, people to sacrifice. This was a blood tax. Literally, if your city-state fell under Aztec control, your people were periodically rounded up and sent to Tenochtitlan to die on the pyramid. The message was clear: resist, and we take more. Comply, and we take fewer. Either way, you're sending us bodies. The Flower Wars served a dual purpose. Officially, they were about taking captives for the gods. Unofficially, they were a way to keep neighboring states weak, terrified, and dependent without the expense of full-scale conquest. The Aztecs didn't need to destroy Tlaxcala or Cholula, they just needed to bleed them slowly through scheduled battles that drained their best warriors, while funneling a steady stream of victims to the capital. Sacrifice was also a domestic control mechanism. Public ceremonies with tens of thousands of spectators served as massive demonstrations of state power. Watch a heart get ripped out at the top of a 60-meter pyramid, while drums pound and copal incense burns. And the idea of revolting against the government suddenly feels less appealing. The spectacle was the point. For individual Aztec warriors, the system provided something even more compelling: social mobility. A commoner from the Msewalton class could, through battlefield captures, earn titles, land, fine clothing, and access to restricted areas of the city. 2 captures got you certain privileges. 4 captures, and you were practically nobility. You could drink pulque in public, something normally restricted. You could wear cotton instead of Maggie fiber. The entire social ladder was built on bringing back living bodies for the altar. When the blood stopped flowing, when Hernan Cortés and his 500 men arrived on the Gulf Coast in 1519, they didn't conquer the Aztecs by themselves. They couldn't have. Tenochtitlan had hundreds of thousands of people and a military machine that had dominated central Mexico for over a century. What Cortés had was timing and allies. Lots of allies. The Tlaxcalans, the Totonacs, the people of Chempoala, and dozens of other groups who had spent decades sending their children and warriors to die on Aztec pyramids joined forces with the Spanish. Cortés didn't have to do much convincing. The Aztec blood tax had created enemies everywhere. When the moment came, those enemies picked the strange bearded men with metal weapons over the empire that had been extracting their hearts for generations. Tenochtitlan fell in August 1521 after a brutal 75-day siege that left the city in ruins and its population devastated by smallpox. The Spanish and their indigenous allies dismantled the Templo Mayor stone by stone, tore down the skull racks, and filled in the canals. Within a generation, Mexico City was built directly on top of the Aztec capital. The cathedral sits roughly where the Templo Mayor once stood. The sacrifices stopped. The old gods were replaced by new ones. But here's something to sit with. The Spanish weren't exactly opponents of public execution. They burned heretics at the stake during the Inquisition. They tortured and killed indigenous people across 2 entire continents for the next 3 centuries. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, the conquistador who wrote the most detailed account of the conquest, described the horror of the skull racks and the blood-soaked temples. But he also watched his own commanders commit atrocities without blinking. The difference was never really about moral superiority. It was about whose god demanded what kind of death. The Aztecs killed on pyramids, the Spanish killed in plazas. Both claimed divine sanction. Neither asked the victims how they felt about the arrangement. And here's the final twist. When archaeologists began excavating the Templo Mayor in 1978, triggered by an electrical company accidentally digging up a massive stone disc depicting the dismembered goddess Coyolxauhqui, they found something the Spanish chronicles hadn't fully prepared them for. The offerings weren't just human remains. They contained coral from the Caribbean, shells from the Pacific, crocodile skeletons, jade from Guatemala, turquoise from what's now the American Southwest, and gold from Oaxaca. The Aztecs weren't just sacrificing people. They were sacrificing the entire known world. Everything valuable, everything rare, everything powerful, all fed into the same hungry pyramid. The temple demanded everything, and for about 200 years, the empire delivered. So if you ever find yourself in 15th century Mesoamerica, do yourself a favor. Run faster.